Hello, welcome back to Gardener's World. It's been a long winter, but actually quite mild and dry here at Longmeadow. And the grass borders have looked good right up into January. But by February, they lose their luster. They get wet, they start to flop and fall, and it's time to cut them back. In fact, the best time to cut ornamental grasses back is the end of winter, before they start into any meaningful growth. As soon as you see any new growth appear at the base of the plant, they need to be cut right back down to the ground. And I'm cutting back all the deciduous grasses, like this miscanthus. This is Miscanthus sachariflorus, an enormous great grass. Whereas the evergreen grasses, like Steeper for example, you just comb through and remove any loose growth, but don't cut them back. Now, coming up on today's programme, Francis celebrates the cyclamen, one of the jewels of the spring season.
Cyclamen are a fantastic way of bringing some much needed colour to what can otherwise be slightly drab winter flower beds.
Adam visits a garden in Suffolk created entirely in one colour, green.
Here, Hebe raconensis, look, a plant that I remember from the Parks Department as a 16-year-old. It's interplanted with yuccas, so you've got these forms just popping up through.
And I shall be sowing seeds of perennial plants that will flower in this garden for years to come. I'm planting a tree here in the grass borders. Two reasons for that. One, because I think trees look great in a border. That's always a good thing to do, but actually this is more specific because I'm planting a tree to celebrate and commemorate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. And I am amongst thousands of you who are doing the same, and will create a green canopy that will spread across the land and still be there in 70 years' time, and I hope a lot longer than that. And the tree I've chosen is a fastigiate birch. Now, fastigiate simply means that it grows more or less vertically. The branches, instead of going out horizontally, tend to grow upwards, and you get this very slim pencil shape. And the silver of the birch is a nod to the Platinum Jubilee. So on both levels, it's going to work really well for me. And it doesn't matter what type of tree you plant, there are basic rules that will ensure that it gets away to a good start and goes on to thrive for many, many years to come. Now, the first thing to do, whether you're planting it into grass or into a border, is to dig a fairly wide area, much wider than the pot or even the roots if you get a bare root one. But at this stage, don't add any goodness to the soil. No compost or manure, because what we want to do is get the roots of the tree growing out. So you don't want to do anything that keeps them inside the planting hole. Now, the next really important thing is to make sure you don't plant the tree in a dip or a saucer. That's the quickest way to kill it. You need to plant it actually on a slight mound, almost on a cone. And then the roots will go slightly down and out, and that will anchor it much more securely. It sounds counterintuitive, but it works. The biggest mistake in planting any tree is to plant it too deeply. So actually, that's about right. Now, what I'm going to do is loosen the sides, so the little feeding roots that are growing out have got nice loose soil to grow into. If you've got a bare root plant, give it a good soak before you plant it, and then spread the roots out. The vast majority of trees, particularly as we go into spring, will be sold in a pot like this. So you take it out of the pot, gently lift it out, and you can see that's not root bound. Healthy roots and a healthy tree. Now I'm going to place that on the surface like that. You can see that's slightly proud. That's perfect. Now start to pull the soil back in like that. And then when you've loosely drawn the soil around it, hold the tree with one hand and then heel around it and deliberately try and make a cone. And this means that you're not damaging the roots that are there, but you're making sure it's nice and secure and not going to move too much. At this point, you have to decide whether to stake it or not. Now, ideally, with a small tree, you don't stake it, because that will encourage it from day one to move. And you want it to move, because that builds in strength and flexibility to the trunk. However, the bigger the tree, the more it needs staking. I think this one actually probably doesn't need staking. So what I'm going to do is cut the bamboo and remove it. Now, if you do stake a tree, far better and far more effective is to stake at an angle, at 45 degrees like that. And you place the stake towards the prevailing wind. If you stake it, only leave it on for 2 years. Now we need to water. Doesn't matter if it's rained for a week before or going to rain for a week, give it a good soak. And then the final stage is to mulch it. It doesn't terribly matter what you mulch it with. I'm going to use garden compost. The purpose of the mulch is primarily to keep the moisture in and to suppress weeds. That is none too generous, but don't heap it up around the base of the plant. And then you will need to water it regularly for the first year. And after a year, it should be able to fend for itself. And the crucial thing is to enjoy it and watch it and get real pleasure from it from day one. Now, Francis went to North Devon to the Garden of Higher Cherrybeer to see the fantastic national collection of cyclamen.
Warming up a wintry day, the willows here lining the path create a fiery display. Underneath is a seasonal carpet of snowdrops. But for me, it's the bright pops of pink, white and magenta that bring real joy to the garden at this time of year. Cyclamen are a fantastic way of bringing some much needed colour to what can otherwise be slightly drab winter flower beds. And it's not just the beautiful reflex petals, but they have a whole array of stunning foliage as well. But not all cyclamen will survive a winter outside. So if you want something which will be long lasting, it's worth being mindful about what you buy. This is cyclamen persicum, and you'll see this easily in garden centres on the run up to Christmas. It's a really good house plant or bedding plant, and it's not fully hardy, so a cold winter will kill this off, unfortunately, but it's so bright and beautiful, lots of different colours, so it's well worth getting if you have somewhere nice and frost-free you can store it for the winter. This is cyclamen hederifolium, which means ivy-leaved. And you can see why. It's got beautiful, quite pointed leaves with a marbling kind of variegation on them. Now this one has finished flowering now. It will flower from about August until October, so autumn flowering, but very, very beautiful. For the winter flowering kind, you need cyclamen coum, which is this one here, a much rounder leaf and lovely delicate flowers, and this will flower from about December time until April. And the lovely thing about this is you can have that winter colour for decades, because these plants live a very long time. Joe Hines has been growing cyclamen since the early 80s and is passionate about these small, delicate flowers. Everywhere I look, there's more and more to see. What is it about cyclamen particularly that you love, though?
I think the fact that they're, well, particularly cyclamen coombe, completely winter hardy, and they provide a lovely colour splash.
And they've taken you on some travels too, haven't they?
They have. It's definitely a really good excuse for a Mediterranean holiday. You see some beautiful scenery. And for instance, if you go to Lake Garda, you can go up into the mountains behind Lake Garda where cyclamen purpurascens grows, and it's really beautiful.
Wow.
And there's a glorious scent. Purpurascens has been used in the perfume industry in the past.
Fascinating. They aren't a typical Mediterranean species that wants kind of full sun, sort of highly drained soil. They're a bit more shade tolerant.
That's right. Cyclamen are a woodland species in the Mediterranean, well,
Right.
mostly woodland. So in that respect, you can grow them here as a woodland ground cover for a garden that's got deciduous trees.
Amazing.
So the deciduous trees provide shade all summer, give them their forest floor, and they take the moisture out of the soil.
Right.
Because cyclamen want to go dormant, or most cyclamen want to be dormant over summer. They don't want to be wet.
Okay, well that makes sense. And with your hellebores and your snowdrops and everything else,
That's right.
obviously all working together in the same way. How many species are there?
There are 24
Right.
at the moment, according to the taxonomists, and I think I've got 23 of them, and one species isn't really in cultivation, and it has only been recently described, and it's very difficult to grow,
And very rare, presumably.
and completely and utterly, it's like from one tiny part of
Wow.
one mountain range in Somalia.
As a national collection holder, Jo spends a lot of time looking after her cyclamen. It's important to her to have backups if any of the plants fail. Look at all these, beautiful.
So,
So you're propagating.
yeah,
Is it from tuber that you tend to do that?
I tend to be potting up tubers if I'm going to show them or have them in the display greenhouse. That's cyclamen coombe, so that's what a coombe tuber looks like. They all have slightly different features. Coombe roots from the bottom, hedropholium roots from the shoulders.
Okay.
But I would want to normally grow cyclamen from seed.
Oh, really?
It's very easy, it's very cheap, and that's how they reproduce themselves in the wild. So those seeds are dried and we'd need to soak them. But actually it's better to sow seed fresh. If you're lucky, it'll germinate the same year that you sow it.
Right.
And the different species have different seed pods. So this is cyclamen persicum, and it has these really weird, wacky, sticking out things that hold the seed away from the plant.
So when do you collect these?
So the seeds are ripe in probably May or June.
How can you tell when they're ripe?
They start to feel like tapioca or a big fat tick, a bit, they're a bit soft inside. You can
Yes.
roll your finger.
Unfortunately, I know exactly what that feels like. And then you'd sow them straight away.
And you sow them straight away.
Right.
As soon as they dry off, they have some sort of dormancy mechanism,
Right.
and they then have to be soaked and go a whole season before they'll germinate.
Okay. So are these ones that you've sown then? These are seedlings?
So these are seedlings that I've sown. You can
Wow.
tear these apart, and they're not going to come to any harm.
Potentially, you've sown a seed, you wait a whole year for germination, you then leave them in their seed pot for another year to 2 years,
Yeah,
and now you're pricking them out.
that's right.
How long would you expect to wait for them to start flowering?
Well, different species do different things. And some of the smaller tubers will flower quite quickly. But hedropholium, for me, takes probably 3 years. Gracum might be 5 years.
Really?
Purpurascens can be 6 years. From a garden design point of view, if you want to lighten up your woodland floor, you can use the silver-leaved ones. Are really good. And of course there's white-flowered ones. White with a silver leaf is very bright. You know,
Yeah,
it's a lovely
beautiful.
light ground cover.
Whilst cyclamen help to provide a source of food for hungry pollinators, there are some other insects which are just as important to the plant's survival. Ants like to eat the sticky starch on the outside of cyclamen seeds and help disperse them, which is why they can end up in all sorts of unexpected places. Once you have introduced hardy cyclamen into your garden, they will gradually spread out and find their place. And right now, set amongst their bedfellows of hellebores and snowdrops, primulas and daffodils. But before the spring really takes hold, this is the perfect time to enjoy cyclamen in their last throes of seasonal colour.
I hadn't known that cyclamen coum produces its roots from the base of this puck-like tuber, whereas cyclamen hederifolium, and I grow both widely in this garden, produces its roots from the shoulder higher up. But what I can tell you is you should never mix the two. What happens is the hederifolium totally swamps cyclamen coum, and within a year or two they'll all be gone and it doesn't work. You do need to keep them separate. And here in the spring garden I've got some cyclamen coum to add to the spring display. This is cyclamen coum roseum. And the colour will pick up on the hellebores. The hellebores have always been a mainstay of the spring garden and they're just coming up to their finest hour. Snowdrops are coming to an end, but the snowflakes, leucojum, are coming good and they're really strong and dramatic. We've got the daffodils, tete-a-tete, small but really perky and proud. And also one of my favourite plants in the whole garden, just poking its foliage through the ground, won't be flowering until the end of this month, and that is the imperial fritillary, one of the wackiest plants you can grow in the garden. I must get these in the ground. Now, as Joe said, they prefer deciduous woodland, and that's what the spring garden is really. Open now at this time of year, and then as the foliage fills out in spring, it gets darker and drier, which is fine for the coum. They're absolutely happy with that. And I'm going to plant them around the base of the hazel here, trying not to do too much damage. Now, when you're planting cyclamen, if you're buying them in a pot, just take them out of the pot and put them in the ground at the same depth. I can just pop in there like that. And hopefully the ants will spread the seed. It's a nice thought, that, isn't it? One of the features of the last couple of years for us has been sharing your gardens with us on the programme. These viewers' videos have been an absolute delight and we intend to continue them for as long as you're prepared to send them in. So please don't stop. Send in your gardens. Doesn't matter what they're like, how big, how small. It could be a window box. Doesn't matter. If you love them, then I'm sure we will love to see them too. And you can get details on how to do that and where to send them if you go to our website. Now, the first garden that we're going to visit today belongs to Libby in Surrey.
Hello, I'm Libby. I'd like to share with you what has been my haven for many years. I've got a few special things I would like to show you. Over here are my beautiful native primroses. It was one clump when we came here 50 years ago, but these I've put together in memory of my husband, who isn't with me anymore, and he loved yellow and they've flowered beautifully. I've got lots of them, you can see, because every year from that one clump I split them up and I plant them around the garden. Soon after moving here, we dug out a small flower bed in the front garden and put all the soil up here. Unbeknown to us, there must have been scillas amongst the soil, and they've spread and spread, unaided and undisturbed for years. I think they like the chalky soil, which drains well. The scillas seem to manage to spread everywhere, and I wait for them to finish before I dig. I store the spare bulbs, allow them to dry before putting them in trays near the pavement for other people to take. I think there must be scillas from my garden in many local gardens now. They're so lovely. I really enjoy them. I hope you've enjoyed seeing my garden as much as I have enjoyed showing it to you. Bye.
Well, thank you for sharing your haven with us, Libby. It's fascinating to visit a garden where someone has occupied and looked after it for 50 years. That's so rare in this day and age. Now, you're very lucky being able to grow scillas like that, because here our heavy clay is not really ideal for them. But the crocus are really happy, and you can see here on the cricket pitch, they're doing well this year. And then the daffodils are coming through and will soon take over from them, and they'll be followed by fritillaries and camassias, so plenty to come. But something I've tried to grow over the years and failed dismally, I have to confess, are camellias. It's the combination of our soil, our climate, and the pH. They really grow best if it's slightly acidic. However, last March, we went down to Exbury Gardens in Hampshire, where they do have success. And we saw the camellias at their very best.
Our first camellias will be starting flowering at the end of February, and then they'll go right through to April. And in a woodland setting like ours, they really sort of bring the garden alive. Gardening for me is about positivity and about hope. They're the sort of start of spring, really. My name's Tom Clark. I'm a head gardener here at Exbury. We've got a fantastic collection of camellias. We've got well over 1,000 individual plants and at least 700 different varieties, which makes Exbury a fantastic garden for a camellia lover like me. In the wild, there's well over 100 different species of camellia, so these are plants that grow naturally throughout Asia, from the sort of Himalayas right through to Japan and southwest China. The International Camellia Register has got over 22,000 named camellias, so it's a huge group of plants. There's pretty much a camellia for everyone, really. So this is my favourite. This is Bob Hope, a fantastic camellia. Got this lovely, intense red flower. It almost glows when the sun shines on it, and backed by the, the nice, really big, glossy evergreen leaves, so it really sets off the red flowers. It's got this lovely sort of slightly more open habit than some of the other Camellia japonicas, which this is a cultivar of. It's quite an early flowering camellia, so it'll flower from the middle of March right through into April. He's been flowering for a couple of weeks with us, and there's still more buds to come, so we'll get a good month out of Bob. If you're only going to grow one camellia in your garden, then, I mean, what more could you ask out of a plant than this, really? It's fantastic. So there's 6 different classifications of flower types. So there's the single flowers, which are very simple flowers. And then there's semi-doubles. There's formal doubles, which have got the lovely sort of imbricate petals, or concentric petals, but no stamens at all. And then there's the anemone forms and the peony forms, and they're much more sort of showy, the big blousy sort of flowers. And then the rose form. Okay, so this is a fantastic camellia. This is Camellia Donation, bred in Cornwall by the Williams family back in the 1930s. So this plant is probably getting on for 100 years old. I mean, we've allowed this to grow into a lovely sort of open spreading tree. But you don't have to. Camellia Donation can be pruned. It can be grown very formally, where you can clip it and then you'll get all the flowers very close in. We've got a really good example of one trained against a house here, where it's been clipped really tight and regularly, and it still flowers really well. One of the great things about Williamsii Donation is that it's got this fantastic succession of flowers. So it's in full flower now, but all of these flowers, as they drop off, there's lots of new buds coming, and it will carry on flowering well into May, really. If the sort of larger, blousy camellias aren't really your thing, one of the great things about the camellia genus is the diversity. And so this is a Camellia cuspidata hybrid, and this has got a much more elegant, lax habit. It's got this lovely weeping branches, a bit more open, and it's got the lovely white single flowers with yellow stamens and nice sort of willow-like leaves. Cuspidata has been used as a parent for a lot of other camellia hybrids like Cornish Spring, and they've got a similar habit, but they've got a bit of hardiness bred into them as well, so they're a better garden plant. and probably grow in a wider range of conditions. People think that camellias can be quite difficult to grow or quite fussy or demanding, which really isn't the case. As long as you've got either neutral or slightly acidic soil, then beyond that, then camellias will grow in most conditions quite happily. If you don't have the right soil in your garden, then you can use ericaceous compost and grow them in pots quite happily. One problem people come across is that you get this chlorosis when the leaves go yellow. Camellias use a lot of nitrogen, particularly in the spring when they're coming into flower. And if they can't draw up enough nutrients through the roots, it can lead to this chlorosis. So one of the problems I think we've got here is poor drainage and compaction, which means that the plant's not drawing up as much nutrients as it could. So just by forking over like this, just outside of a drip line, so that's just to the edge of the branches, and that avoids damaging the roots, especially the small feeder roots which are quite close to the surface. We'll improve the drainage but without doing any damage. And then we'll give it a mulch, and then that should hopefully perk it up. Another thing that people find is that they don't really like the brown flowers. So I mean, you can, if it's a smaller shrub, you can just easily go around and take them off, leaving all obviously the flowers that are coming and the new buds. But if it's a bigger shrub like this, you can basically just get in and just give it a good old shake, which is what we do. It looks a bit ruthless, but it really dislodges all the old petals and tidies them up a treat, really. We only ever do this once or twice a week in the season, just to stop them looking untidy, really. Camellias have been prized by gardeners for hundreds, probably thousands of years. They flower early in the spring and they flower for quite a long period of time. They're tough, they've got lovely dark green evergreen foliage. So, you know, they're a good all-round plant, and they deserve, you know, a place in British gardens. If you think you don't like camellias, you probably just haven't found the right one.
If you want to see the display at Exbury Gardens for yourself, the garden will be open in a few weeks' time and the camellias will still be going strong. Now, the display here on the table outside the potting shed is probably as bright and as vivid with colour as at any time of year. And although the daffodils and the scillas and the muscari and the hyacinths are beautiful and I love them, the real stars are these early iris. The intense blues, the deep purples, made deeper and richer by the touches of orange and yellow. So you have ones like this, which is harmony, and then you have pixie, which is a deeper, darker purple. And they don't flower for very long. They're late this year, but usually it's from the middle of February to the middle of March. You have this intense blaze of colour, and I absolutely love them. Now, still to come on today's programme. Adam enjoys a garden in Suffolk based on texture and form rather than colour.
Have a look at the bark at the trees, because they're very prominent, you know, that texture really stands out. And the light picks up the bamboo and they make a statement.
We meet Andrew Salter, who has created his own garden oasis in the depths of the Kent countryside.
I'm very conscious that I'm living in a field here. I wanted to be comfortable, but most important was simply being wrapped in nature.
And I shall be revealing a new big project here in the garden. Many of us are used to growing vegetables from seed and annuals or biennials from seed. But not so many of us grow perennials from seed. And, you know, these are plants that can last 20 or 30 years and are the main features in our borders. Most people, myself included, tend to go to a garden centre and buy a good-sized plant, which might cost us upwards of 10 or even 20 pounds, and plant it, and there we go. But actually, you can grow your perennials from seed just as easily as you can grow a carrot or a cosmos. And I've got 3 seeds here, and if you would like to grow them along with me, I will take you through all the stages from germination to pricking out, potting on, planting out, and how to look after them once they're growing. And we can share that experience. Now, it doesn't matter what you're sowing. The principle is essentially the same. I like to use seed trays because they don't need the depth of soil that a pot would give you, and you can get more seeds in them. Use a peat-free potting compost. Fill it up. So shake it like that. And what I do is I have one of these boards and I just level it out like that, and then gently tamp it down. I'm not compacting it. I'm just getting an even surface for the seeds to land on. Now, I've got 3 lots here. I've got Verbena bonariensis, tall, topped with wonderful purple flowers that bees and butterflies love in late summer and early autumn. A really good garden favourite. I've got Rudbeckia goldstern, and it is amazing how a small packet of seeds can produce a mass of these plants. It's a really good way of filling up a border. And finally, I've got Delphinium sky blue, this blue spire of flower that will start to flower in early summer, and then when you cut them back, they will flower again in late summer and early autumn. So if we start with the Delphinium, what I'm going to do is place these, and by placing them apart, it means that when I come to prick them out, I'm not going to be damaging the roots of neighbouring plants. Now, having sown those and spaced them out as best I can, gently press them down so that the seed makes good contact with the growing medium. And I'm going to cover that very lightly with some compost. You don't necessarily need to sieve it, but just a little sprinkle to cover it. And then label. Now, I have a basic rule that I label anything that can be picked up. Now, that applies for slightly larger seeds, big enough to handle. But when you have a mass of smaller seeds, the technique is slightly different. Put some compost in there. Give it a shake, that's good. So if we sow the Rudbeckia, you will see that these are smaller than the Delphinium seeds, even though the plant is actually quite big. There you go. Those are too small to place individually. So what you do is you just take a pinch in your fingers and sprinkle. And resist the temptation to sprinkle too thickly. Again, cover them over very lightly. Once you've sown your seeds, you need to give them the best chance of germinating. And generally, heat and moisture will do that. So a windowsill above a radiator will be absolutely fine. If you've got a greenhouse, that's great. Water them. Don't let them dry out, but they shouldn't be sodden. And you will see seedlings start to appear somewhere between 10 days and 3 weeks. Now, what we've done here is invest in colour for the future, not just for next year, but for years and years to come. But Adam went to Suffolk to visit a garden that has proudly and deliberately invested in just one colour, green.
Creating a garden from scratch can be a very exciting thing, if not a little bit scary. And I think for a lot of us, we look forward to adding the colour. But what if you're going to limit that to mostly green? What are you going to end up with? Well, could well be something like this.
Behind this 15th century thatched cottage
is a south-facing sloping garden belonging to Geoffrey and Christine Ingham, who decided to entirely replace the old garden and create a very personal oasis of evergreen planting. It's a considered study in texture, structure, form and space. Foliage from all around the world, brought alive by winding gravel paths. It's all about gardening in layers and contrasting the vertical with the horizontal. The trunks of the tall trees help frame the multi-stem shrubs that have had their canopies lifted. And at their feet, topolarised evergreen form an undulating bank.
We moved from Cambridge and saw the house, which I thought was all right, but then I saw this site, which was a scoop out of a south-facing hill.
Yeah.
And it had some mature Scots pines on the perimeter, and then a lot of mess in the middle. Yeah. And I thought, oh, that looks like a good site for a garden. I wanted to do a garden with pines and shapes and a bit Japanese, but not copy. I just like pine trees.
Yeah.
So, the idea was to have the pine eaten with other things.
An understory of clipped shrubby honeysuckle, Lonicera nitida, snakes its way through the garden, along with a series of box balls that look as though they're tumbling down a hill. This hasn't been designed, well, not in an orthodox way.
Geoffrey, why evergreens?
I think that there must be some deep psychological reason for this. And I think it's permanence.
Is that what it is?
I can look at this in the winter and it changes a bit in the summer because I have little bits of colour here and there.
Yeah.
But I don't know, it's just sort of permanent. It's almost like defying winter. And also, it's showing off a bit. It's a show off. It is, come on. It's got to be bold. There's got to be an impact.
And it certainly is bold. His innate sense of where things should be has created some captivating planting. I think Geoffrey has been really brave in the way he's put this garden together. And what I mean by that is the amount of evergreen. You could look at it and say, oh, it could be boring, but it's not, because he's used shapes, forms, undulation. So there's movement. There's this wonderful sort of continuity, but the other thing that he does that I think is clever is he provides you with his bang, little surprises as you walk round the corners. Here, Hebe raconensis, look, a plant that I remember from the Parks Department as a 16-year-old. But he's interplanted with yuccas, so you've got these forms just popping up through. They're all through his front gate. The first thing you see is Prunus lusitanica, which is just Portuguese laurel. Canopies lifted, clipped into mushrooms, interplanted with phormiums and trachycarpus. These wonderful forms and shapes play against each other. I'm loving this. I think one thing that we can take for granted when we're creating our gardens is the light. That understanding of how it moves through your garden in a day, but also the 12 months, is really important as to how the garden feels. And I think Geoffrey's pretty well nailed it here, because the undulation of these shapes and forms, you get sort of light and shadows, and it bounces and it sparkles, but then they become reflective surfaces. So some of the branches and the clipped heads reflect not just on the ground, but also on this vast green. And then have a look, at the bark, at the trees, because they're very prominent, that texture really stands out. And the light picks up the bamboo. And I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, but in all honesty, you can find a bamboo for most conditions. You just got to do your research, choose one that maybe doesn't run. But he's, again, been brave here. He's gone for it. And the way the light just reflects, incredible. And they make a statement. And then, there you go. gust of wind comes through, and the sound is incredible. So again, it works for your senses. None of this garden would work without control, but I want to know where that need comes from.
I wanted to create something solid. It's difficult. I really find it, and it's to create something. It's as simple as that.
You get the sense with Jeffrey that he just doesn't stop. But what I admire about him is he gardens without fear. He'll lift the canopy, he'll dig something up and move it if it doesn't work. But also, he's chosen plants that some people might just look down their nose at, not him. No, he plants them, he moulds them, he creates something that provides him comfort. And for me, that's what it's all about.
I love Jeffrey and Christine's garden, but then I do love evergreens of all forms, particularly when, as he said, it's a bit Japanesey, when they're sculpted and shaped like that. But the main thing about evergreens in any garden, however you use them, is that they are life in the middle of winter. There's a whole body of literature about the power of green and how that challenges winter. And they give structure, they give shape. So I've got yew domes at the end of the paths, and of course these Irish yew columns. Last but certainly not least, we've got topiary Nigel. Green forever and ever. Now it's time to go and visit one of your gardens again. And this is taking us to Morton-in-Marsh and the garden of Thomas Neve.
Hey Gardener's World, come into my garden. So this is a place of peace and tranquility. This beautiful hydrangea was more of a pink colour last year, and I experimented by putting some coffee grounds around the base of the plant, and it's gone a really nice blue and purple colour this year, so I'm really, really happy with how that's gone. In the evening, the scent is beautiful from these sweet peas, and I have scented jasmine up here as well. I'd like to show you my tomato plants. So grew these from seed, all organically, and I'm really happy with how they're going. I hope that I get a good crop this year. Although my garden's small, I added a lot of height to it to make it appear bigger, and this Clematis montana in the spring is just covered in beautiful white flowers. It's an absolute delight. I like the structure and the height of these daylilies. I really like Japanese gardens, but I also like cottage gardens. So I've tried to create a fusion between East and West. And this is really my peaceful place just to come and relax. So I hope that I've encouraged and inspired some people here to give gardening a go, no matter what age you are, even if you're a young man like myself. I think it's really beneficial for your mental health. So thanks for having me, Gardener's World.
Like that. Good girl. There, you can help me. Good girl. What is great, of course, is to see somebody the age of my children gardening really well, enjoying it and getting exactly the same sort of wealth and richness from it that all of us do. Now, this greenhouse in the summer had a really good crop of tomatoes. But of course, when the tomatoes go in October, you're left with an empty space right through till next May. So for many years, I've grown winter salads. And what we're growing are very different plants, to what you grow outside for a summer salad. So let's start here. This is a mustard, and this is called red frills, and I have to say, it has been fantastic. Now, it's quite delicate. You can see it's got a beautiful colour, and the taste is mustardy but not overwhelming. Now, next up is a chicory. Totally different family. The mustard is a brassica. This is a chicory, but it doesn't have a heart. It's an endive. You can see there are touches of botrytis on this. This is a sort of brown mould. That is my fault. Winter was quite warm, and I should have had more ventilation. If you do see mould in your greenhouses in winter, it almost always means that you're just not ventilating enough. However, it hasn't really harmed the plant. It's just a few leaves. Absolutely delicious. Now, here we have mitsuna. Again, best eaten when it's not too big. Good mustardy taste, as near to rocket as you get from a Japanese green. I'm very fond of that. That's good, so that adds to the mix. And the secret is, if you've got a greenhouse, use it all winter. Don't just think of it as somewhere to grow summer crops. A little bit of protection, and you can grow a wide range of delicious salad crops for every day of the year. Now, most of us have gardens outside our houses, but we went down to Kent to visit a gardener who has created his garden like a moat, entirely surrounding his house, without apparently any kind of path to be seen anywhere.
Technically, yes, there is a path to my front door. There is stonework. It is there. It's just hidden. Nobody can see it, least of all the plethora of Kentish delivery men. My name's Andrew Salter, and I love this garden, and I'm never leaving. I'm very conscious that I'm living in a field here. I wanted to be comfortable. I wanted to be surrounded by a certain amount of luxury, but in a Spartan fashion. But most important was simply being wrapped in nature. It's a bit bonkers, clearly. I think of it as a living, breathing, pretty monster with which I'm surrounded. It's a tongue twister, Eryngium, Pandanifolium, Physic purple. It fits in with the monstrous vibe. It looks like a monster. To me, even though it's very tall, it makes perfect sense at the front because you've got this lovely basal foliage for most of the year. And then you just get this one shoot, at least in my case here, which is very easy to see around, but it adds texture at the very front of the border. It's a plant that everybody comments upon. There's really nothing not to like, I would say, about this oddball. Everyone told me that it would be financial suicide. I struggled to get a mortgage. Eventually, the transaction occurred. I got the keys. So I suddenly was living in a barn with holes around the window frames, which I hadn't entirely expected. You know, I had to take that first winter sleeping on the floor with no hot water, just desperate to start digging the ground. You know, I started building the garden before I even had a kitchen. This is a rather overwhelming character, I think. This is Populus deltoides purple tower. Ordinarily, it's a tree. I stool it every year. So, you know, I cut it off at the base, and all of this growth is from one season. There's something extremely attractive about this leaf. It's really a character, you know, next to this Leucanthemilla Ceratina, yet to flower, but very close, 6-7 foot tall, barely needs staking, big daisy flowering plant. Good contrast here with the purple and the white daisies. Other ingredients that deliver really all through the season. You know, this rose, perhaps the most English of all plants, a rose by the name of Tottering Along Gently, has very, very soft, lovely, buttery yellow flowers. It's flowers all season long from early summer. It's fading away now, but there are still blooms and they'll continue until the first frost. It's a stimulating concoction, it's a potpourri, and you know, I like to come out and see it every morning. I didn't make a plan initially, and I had done so with gardens before. I put them down on paper, and for whatever reason, I felt the urge to do this spontaneously, instinctively. I had an idea of how the structure might grow. You know, I started with the trees and shrubs, and it spread out from there. I think in the 60s there was this scientific experiment where somebody fed spiders various psychoactive, mind-altering compounds. My garden looked a lot like the web of the spider who'd taken LSD. I love conifers. They strike me as maybe the most characterful plants in horticulture. They're like these eternal, timeless, grumpy old men. And maybe I see myself in them. And this is a wonderful example. I mean, I'm frankly sick of hearing how unfashionable they are. Who cares? This is Cryptomeria japonica rasensugi, which means twisted cedar. In Japanese, it's from Japan. It's really vigorous. You know, this one, been here probably 5 years. It was just one green stem of about that length when I planted it. And the entire stem is contorted. I get extremely hot under the collar visiting a conifer nursery. The variety is quite astonishing. I would like to picture the garden being in 10 years dominated actually by these great monsters. There are very many of them around planted, and they'll take over, and the garden will belong to them. This garden's put me in touch with nature. It's put me in touch with the seasons. It's made me far more conscious of my surroundings, with light, with breeze, with sounds. I'm grounded here. There was an occasion actually when my postman came. I was about to go on holiday for a week. I was a bit grumpy. My postman asked me, you know, why the long face? And I explained, and his answer was, well, this is going to be here when you get back. But in truth, it's not going to be here when I get back in this current state, because it's always changing. And so it will never be the same again, you know, and, you know, at the risk of sounding terribly dull, I don't want to miss it. It's a sort of trap, but a trap which I'm willing to fall victim to. I'm not leaving.
What Andrew's garden shows, apart from being very beautiful, is that a garden can, and for many of us is, absolutely central to our idea of home. Now this is a purple hazel, Corylus maxima purpurea, and we cut it back about every 5 years. And in that 5 years, it grows really quite big, like a tree with 5 or 6 stems and these wonderful, rich purple leaves. But when it reaches a certain height, it does shade out the other plants here in the jewel garden. And so we coppice it, because by cutting it down every 5 or 6 years and getting regrowth, that encourages much bigger than normal leaves. And you can do it with paulownia, catalpa, you can do it with willow or dogwood, and hazel works very well. So take the big growth down to the ground. But what's left behind are these shoots. I will now prune out all but about half a dozen of them. And very quickly, in about 3 years, they will get substantial, and then in 5 or 6 years' time, I'll cut these back too. Right, this is a job that I like to take my time on because I want to get it right. So while I'm doing this, here's some jobs you can be doing this weekend. If you haven't done so already, it's time to sow your sweet peas to give them a fighting chance to develop into good, strong plants. A pot is ideal. I sow 3 seeds for every 3-inch pot. Use a normal peat-free compost, press the seeds lightly in, cover them over, water them and put them somewhere warm to germinate. Although for most of us the soil is too cold for planting potatoes, now is the time to buy seed potatoes and chit them. Take them out of their bag and place them on a seed tray or an egg box, and then put this in a frost-free, bright place like a windowsill. They will develop knobbly, dark shoots, and then when you do plant them, when the soil warms up, this will encourage them to grow quicker, and therefore you can harvest them sooner. It's time to prune late flowering or group 3 clematis. They produce these flowers on new growth, so cut back all last year's growth down to the bottom bud. It seems drastic, but this will stimulate new shoots that will carry this year's display. We've got changes planned for this year, and in fact we've been making changes over winter. The biggest here in the damp garden. We've taken up the stone paving, replaced it with a curving path, and made some new beds. There's a new one in the corner here which will be perfect for hostas and ferns. Very shaded, but we'll keep it damp, and that's perfect. And along the edge, a narrow bed, and I want to focus on candelabra primulas. I love those, and that will be a really good way of displaying them. But the biggest change by far is at the back of the pond, because there I've started to make a bog garden. Now, if you're not quite sure what a bog garden is or how to make one, I'm afraid you're going to have to wait for the first instalment of that exciting adventure till next week, because we've run out of time today. So till next Friday, bye-bye.